So we'll start with brief introductions of each of the panelists. Open it up to a general sort of statement on your views of the future of demand, and then go through a couple of questions and open it up pretty quickly to questions from all of you. So, well, Dr. Heine has already been introduced, so I won't do it twice. Next we have Mr. Brendan Bilton, who is a consultant to E.ON New Energy Systems. Brendan provides project support and consultancy services to E.ON for small-scale energy systems and development of technology strategies for the retail business. Mr. Bilton is a qualified metallurgist. Or metallurgist. Metallurgist. Thank you very much. From University of Manchester, and specialist in the field of advanced materials. For the past 10 years, he's been involved in renewable energy sector, developing business strategies, securing contracts, and raising finance for startup companies. Brendan's a non-executive director of the Low Carbon Vehicle and Fuel Cell Knowledge Transfer Network, and a member of the Stationary Power Committee for the JTI in Brussels, a member of the Parliamentary Group on Energy Studies, and currently a member of the Energy Industries Club. So thank you for joining us, Brendan.
Thank you, Daniel.
The next panelist we have is Dave Worthington, who is he's managing director in charge of Camco Advisory Services and a board member of the Baxi Partnership Trust, an employee-owned investment fund. Dave joined Camco in 2003, leaving the world of mainstream energy consulting to specialize in renewables and energy services. Dave is advising a number of high-profile UK and international clients on deployment of energy efficiency, renewable energy. He sits on the UK Green Building Council's Policy Committee, the Zero Carbon Hubs Energy Work Group, and the Institute of Mechanical Engineers Renewable Power Committee. So thank you very much for joining us. And finally we have Mr. Patrick Turnbull from GE. And he is leader of the digital energy growth strategy for GE Energy Services. Patty joined GE Energy in 2010 and is part of the European leadership team for the digital energy business, providing integrated smart solutions and reliable power delivery systems to electric utilities, as well as the oil and gas, critical infrastructure, and industrial sectors. His business career includes senior management roles at BT, Fujitsu Telecom Europe, and he was also Vice President of Sales and Marketing for a startup in the medical device industry. So, thank you very much, Patty. I think we will start off by just asking your initial thoughts on the sector. If it's okay, I'm gonna pass you over for this particular part, since you've given us sort of a half an hour of initial thoughts. And just to frame what we're talking about here, we're talking about the shape of future energy demand. So your view of the key trends that will determine energy demand for the next decades, and things to think about in your comments would be if you see any sort of deep transformation in individual and companies' habits in consumption of energy, to what extent technology developments are changing, technology developments such as smart grids or electric vehicles or other distributed generation going to drive the evolution of energy demand. Things like shocks to the system where we can see changes in demand. And also maybe any comments you have about differences in how the OECD demand is growing versus the BRICS and emerging world. Maybe it's a tale of two cities or a tale of two worlds. So with that, I guess I'll give the first word to Brendan, and we'll work our way down the panel and then open to questions.
Right, well, thank you, Daniel. So there's not much to talk about then.
Can you speak into the mic? Yeah.
I think energy, I think the first premise is what is the energy of tomorrow going to look like? And I've been talking to a few people over lunch. The truth is nobody knows, and that's the problem. If anybody knew what the energy of tomorrow or the energy network of tomorrow was going to be, we probably wouldn't be having conferences like this. We'll be all going out and making some money. And so we've got to really accept that the energy of tomorrow is going to be vastly different from the energy of today. And that means there's going to be absolute massive changes in the way that energy is delivered, who supplies it, and more importantly, how you make money from it. I don't think I've got any specific comments to make at the moment, but what I can tell you is that from my own perspective, being in the energy market for the last 10 years or so, is that I really do believe we're now coming to the end of what I call the first stage of the energy revolution. So the energy's been spread out, it's become a utilitarian commodity type thing. Now we've got to start changing the way we use energy, the way we value energy, the way we produce it, and the way we utilise it. And I think we can come back to more detail about that later, but I'll hand over to the other panellists on that. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have the magic answer either to all of this. I think we are seeing some interesting trends, some changes in, I suppose, corporate and domestic behaviour. Generally, the strong upward pressure on global energy prices is driving an increased interest and demand for energy efficiency and demand reduction. I think even more so as some of the regulatory mechanisms like feed-in tariffs have been changed around and have given some investors some nervous times in various parts of the world, and so energy efficiency has looked like the new black and the new thing to prioritise and look for business growth opportunities in. We're also, I think, still seeing a slightly stronger sort of solution provider push than a consumer pull. I think particularly in domestic markets, the uptake predictions for things like the UK's Green Deal, so a scheme providing finance for energy efficiency investment, are still predicted to be fairly low. So we do need some sort of big shocks or big changes in consumer behaviour to make a difference there. On the corporate side, I think one of the interesting trends is looking at supply chains and the top of supply chains using their influence to drive better behaviour in all their suppliers. And so you've got companies like Marks and Spencer's and big brands sort of sending out questionnaires to all of their suppliers and asking for information on energy consumption and carbon emissions, and that does and will drive quite a bit of behavioural change. I think there's definitely going to be a change away from centralised power generation to decentralised energy. I'm sure others have said similar things today, and will say similar things throughout this panel session. The sale of negawatts rather than megawatts, so selling units of energy reduction, so that becoming a proper tradable commodity should, and I think will be a key trend going forwards. The critical question for me is whether all of this actually results in absolute carbon emissions reductions. So there's interesting evidence around about this issue of rebound effect, where people reduce their energy consumption in one area and then they increase their energy consumption or carbon emissions in another. I think there's general consensus on figures around 10 to 30% of rebound effect, so lost energy reductions in vehicle and heating savings, where people go straight out and they buy other products and they turn the thermostat up and feel a bit more comfortable because they now have more money to spend. So there are differences in OECD and non-OECD countries about how quickly both relative and absolute decoupling of emissions reductions from GDP is happening. I think we don't have absolute emissions reduction in non-OECD countries, and we do in OECD countries, but even that is slowing at the moment, which is a worrying trend. So lots of I think interest from investors and solution providers in energy efficiency, but a long way to go before that really makes a dent in global carbon emissions.
Okay. Thank you, and I'm struck by the number of MBAs in the room who are all on the make, so to speak, for your career. So here's a punt at how to make money. It's a close-run thing. Which is bigger, the smart grid or the smart grid conference industry?
My money's on the conferences.
That's right. The light-hearted introduction is to make a serious point about the extent of discussion that there is. I mean, this has been a fantastic forum, and I certainly can live up to the calibre of this morning's panel discussion, and it was insightful even from an industry guy like me. And I would say at the outset that, and I mean this with all due deference and compliment, Andreas, on the the problem definition driver slides that you used, you could change the name. We would say exactly the same things. There's an emerging consensus about those challenges and problems. The impacting things that were different. And what I wanted to do in this couple of minutes introduction was just take a slightly different tack to complement what we've heard so far, and make the point that what we've heard, you'd have to see it as a big basket with stakeholder interests, and there are a lot of stakeholder interests which will affect the deployment of smart grid technologies, the future energy trends. So big tick in the box, urbanisation, big tick in the box for the inexorable growth of wherever you pitch the northeast curve. Go to 2030 and 2050 as milestones, and it will be significantly more. You don't have to put a number on it. A big tick in the box for things that people don't realise are behind the light switch, to make to understand the relationship with energy and the investment that's needed. So the average age, I think, of utility plant that you saw in the transmission and distribution area in Europe is probably 38 to 40 years old, and it's coming up to replacement. And I give you some practical figures of the impact of that. This is public domain information. And where I live in Northern Ireland, the utility has 800,000 customers. It's in its 5-year regulated period finishing in the middle of this year, it will have spent 300 million or so in capex. Its projection for the next 5-year period is 960 million. Now project that into the UK, and we're facing significant asset requirements and financing investment. Now that is one group of interests. If you look at the trends that determine the demand for energy, which is what our chairman asked us to do at the start, the consumer engagement with energy is critical. And at this point in time, there's been an underachievement collectively in penetrating those arguments and raising awareness and getting wider scale deployment with consumers. You've all read the horror stories in the book about Holland going too quickly and what happened. Aspects of the Californian utility market went too quickly. But if you look at what happens and when the consumer is properly engaged, Enel say that they've invested in Italy €2.5 billion in installing 33 million smart meters, so every household in Italy is connected with that, and they claim that there's a €500 million saving from that. Now, if you're a consumer, and you've all read the broadsheets and every sheet, over the last couple of months about the distrust there is with the energy providers, and the absolute disbelief that consumers will see the benefits from some of these upstream investments, and that's a critical factor, not in their energy usage, but even once they're connected. We've got to think we talked about downstream in this session. Downstream, you've now got this new animal called a prosumer growing. Now, the numbers aren't big, but again, Andreas in his slides highlighted it. This is distributed generation. They're small and large scale. That interaction with energy and providing energy back to the market is a key influencer in the demand and in the ability or the utilities' future technology challenges. And just again, give you a figure from Ireland. The Irish Southern Republic of Ireland regulator published the results of a 2-year trial, and the results have been The data has been anonymised for obviously data protection reasons, but lodged with the University of College of Dublin for global academics to study. And during that trial, there were 6,500 households put on 4 time of use tariffs. Now a pretty narrow range, not a big range, but and the overall result was that there was a 2.5% overall reduction in demand. Okay, so it registers on the scale, when you're planning. But critically, at the peak, and again, I'm glad you put those slides up, Andreas. But the peak that Andreas was showing there was at peak, where the consumer just was interacting with the knowledge that he was on he had a printed tariff put on the fridge door or whatever. He reduced his demand they reduced their demand by 8.1%. Where they had an in-home display, it was 11.2%. Now that begins to be significant, So will they use less? We don't know, because to the point there that was made by my colleagues, in California they've had very mixed results. Depending, you get 2 building blocks, one using 3 times more than the other, because the consumers choose to have a lifestyle and participate in using energy however they want. So that aspect is floating around there, and it's a big influence. Now, roughly, consumers consume about 1/3 of all of the electricity. 80% is going to the industrial and consumer market, who are already used to technology contracts and paying for demand constraint opportunities, or rather getting a benefit of that. But then factor in the electric cars and the smart energy technology, and there's a fascinating project underway in the Shetland Islands, and it's called the NINES, Northern Isles Network Expansion Scheme, and it involves large-scale storage, making this Shetland Isles totally self-sufficient from wind, because they can store it, and critically employing 6,000 hot water boilers from a commercial company, but which retain thermal energy at levels not seen before. So then, can you extrapolate that to the rest of the UK? That hits the crunch that people are stripping out hot water boilers and fitting in combi boilers. But again, that's an influencer on the big macroeconomic scene. And do I see any shocks to the system? I think the sooner we engage with the consumer side of this, the sooner we will scare out, to use a Northern Ireland expression, issues like data privacy and complete interoperability to take away the risk of use and comfort. So that's just a few thoughts from my perspective.
Great. Andreas, did you have any comment on any of Patty's comments, or any agreements or differences there? Or?
Yeah, maybe a few comments. Yeah, and I like it. I like. Okay. I mean, yes. I also have the feeling. Yes, there are a lot of smart grid conferences. There are really a lot of smart grid business. What are the business cases behind? Are we really able to change consumers' behavior? If you are for some years in this industry, there are a lot of people that say, "Hey," and everything developed much slower than we expected, and so on. No, on the other hand, I try to bring it back to a more optimistic view. I mean, if you look back in history, there are probably very few cases where economies felt because they did too much innovation. So I think if we now go into it, and really it's probably not that we plan entirely already for a system in 20 years. That is not possible. I think we have to now see what will be the first steps into this arena, non-regret moves. There was immediate business case behind. And they will drive new applications. I mean, if you look into the telecommunications industry 20 years ago, who at all, had expected all the applications that are possible today and the huge business models behind it, and the huge different consumer behavior behind it. So actually, I'm more optimistic and say probably most of the potential applications and the motivations of the future consumers to use energy in a totally different way and also to interact with the energy suppliers in a totally different way, even like a game or like a competition or whatever, we probably do not even know yet. And I think we have to do now different steps, non-regret moves, where we also find an investment because there's an immediate business case behind it. And then it will move because I'm firmly convinced that only very few, not at all, maybe not one economy failed because they innovated too much.
Okay, well let's keep on that topic of new business models, and just think about we don't know what they are, but maybe we have some ideas. Energy service companies, for instance, are coming up and contracting savings. All sorts of different leasing companies are coming up to finance the first cost of some of this equipment. So I'd open up to Dave and Brendan. Maybe if you two guys can comment on any new business model.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, since we're one of the utility representatives here, the challenge that's facing us is probably greater than anybody can imagine. And I think just from an E.ON perspective, it's even harder because in 10 years' time, we're going to lose 10 gigawatts of our nuclear fleet in Germany. We've got the largest nuclear fleet in Germany. And for us, coming back onto the business model case, we couldn't, loss of 10 gigawatts of power in Germany is a big issue, but that's a political issue. So if the lights go out, that's the politician's fault, it's not the utility fault. But the real problem for us is, where do we start generating the business money from? Where do we get the gross margin and the cash that we get from our nuclear fleet today in 10 years' time? And that's really important because that has to underpin our investments over the next 10 years in the new energy technology. And that's where I've been the last year or so. And to tell you the truth, it is the most challenging thing I've ever had to do in my life, and probably the most challenging thing I will ever have to do. Because you can't look at something today, whatever that technology is, and say in 20 years' time, is that going to be valid? Because it's not. And we come back down to the business models. The area that's really, the region that E.ON likes to look as its experimental playground is actually the UK because of its open market. When you start looking at energy models, we're really limited because of the private wire limitation. So we can't sell electricity as a private provider in an ESCO model. So we've already got one hand tied behind our back. And so we have to try, and if we're looking at an ESCO model at a community scale level, the only thing we can manipulate is the heat. And we have to then compete against other startup companies that don't have that problem, companies like Infinis and some other startup companies in the UK, who can do both. And so we have to work really hard, and we are working hard, and we're doing some very neat ESCO modelling where we can start looking at packages where we can provide a solution to a housing developer which will give them carbon credits, which means that they then don't have to build the houses quite to the full building rates, and we can start doing some deals where they don't get penalised as well. So the market in the UK is restrictive from a group perspective, but actually what it's highlighted to us all is not only isn't there a solution today for a business model or for an energy solution, but whatever that solution is for the UK, it sure as hell ain't going to work in Sweden, and it won't work in Germany, and it definitely won't work in some of the Eastern European states. So what it's doing is that you've then got to start trialling a whole new load of other new technologies that might actually work in there. And that's before we start looking at some of the emerging market views that we've got. Certainly Turkey, Brazil and India are the three emerging markets that E.ON's got a strong interest in. And you've got a whole different ballpark of technologies you've got to start looking for. So for us, what we're trying to do at the moment is to look at business models that don't involve kilowatt hours in and kilowatt hours out. And actually, when you start looking at business models from that perspective, from a small community perspective, when I say small, retail business for E.ON is anything less than 5 megawatts. Okay, so, and the reason it's anything less than 5 megawatts is there's nobody else in the organisation who's prepared to get out of bed for anything less than 5 megawatts. So all of the rubbish gets lumped into the retail business, and it's for us to sort out a business case for it. But it's actually quite interesting because 5 megawatts is quite a reasonable size of energy to start managing, and to start then playing tricks with in terms of arbitraging in aggregation type models and demand side management, flexible demand, and all that other stuff. So we're looking at playing all of these different tunes. But what it does, and Daniel knows this as well, what it does do is it starts changing your perspective about the competitive environment. And actually, when we start looking into the future, who are going to be the energy suppliers at the retail business in 20 years' time? Well, what I am convinced about is it ain't going to be a utility. I think Paddy highlighted the fact it's prosumers. Utilities are only good at selling one way. They're absolutely useless at then doing the balance between maybe the customers being the producers and stuff. And the reason for that is quite clear, because in the UK, after banking, probably utilities are about the most hated public enemy number 2. And, you know, we have to live with that. But in a prosumer environment, you have to have an intimate relationship with your customer. You have to have a trusting, intimate relationship with your customer. You have to have a trusting and understanding relationship with your customer. And you have to be able to share value. Now, those are things that a utility today cannot do. But there are lots of other companies out there that have got very strong brand images that know exactly how to do that. With the new energy systems coming on board, such as the ones Andreas and Paddy have talked about, with decentralised energy, with a prosumer market, there's going to be a hell of a lot of new businesses coming up with new business models, and the provision of energy is just going to be an add-on to a service that the consumer's already getting. That's where I see the market going. Hopefully some people might be in it today, but others may die.
Dave, I'd love to get your views on that, because I know you've done a lot of work looking at different business models.
Yeah, I'm quite often on the other side of the table from Ian, so we're policing on behalf of clients the deals that they're striking with energy services companies. And it's not a new area. Energy services models and energy performance contracting has been around for a long time, but they're certainly getting more sophisticated, and which is great. I think clients are starting to get better deals, or customers are getting a better deal, and solution providers are offering a better service. There's still quite a long way to go with all of that. So generally, I think there's a move towards a greater performance element to these contracts. So greater risk, greater reward, hopefully for both sides. So I think in the past, some companies have been guilty of sort of promising performance savings where actually they're not really taking any risk. But that has only come about because we now have much more sophisticated metering and monitoring and targeting systems, the sort of thing that were mentioned earlier. One of the key problems that we face is the cost of finance needed to make a reasonable package of energy measures work, or energy efficiency measures, particularly some discrete bits of clean energy generation or renewable energy generation kit that actually work very well on a project finance basis. But when you're looking at these sort of packaged energy services models, then really you need economy of scale, low cost of borrowing. So actually we are looking for the utilities and companies like E.ON to have a very big part of this market, because they have the balance sheets. Blue chip clients that we have are able to finance measures themselves. Some of them even have their own banks, some of them have a very low cost of borrowing. So it's the SMEs and the smaller businesses that are in danger of missing out. And I think there's a need for the aggregators and people that are sitting between those companies and utilities like E.ON, sort of packaging things up. And I do see that happening, and that will definitely be a trend. information transparency and the lack of information asymmetry is the sort of critical thing to really make this work, and for consumers to start demanding energy services more, and to trust the solution providers.
Just to add to one dimension to that, and yes, there will have to be invention in the type of energy services that are bundled up, whether you're selling warmth and heat rather than electrons, all of that market piece. But the other dimension will be, again, the consumer's personal engagement with their energy usage through time of use tariffing, whether it's static or real-time pricing. Smart grid intelligence will enable that to happen, and here's an example of it in practice in a mid-state US or mid-US state utility. They have time of use tariffing, and the customer, like a commercial customer here, signs a contract for a certain amount of energy with a threshold put on it, and the threshold is applied during this peaking time, 4 to 7. In this American utilities case, I was visibly taken aback to hear the penalty. If they broke that, it was 10x. Do you know? And so that, guess what? They had a lot of adherence, but the flip side, or the benefit side for the customer, was much cheaper rates, because they weren't pushing them into that environment. So when you talk about, it's not a new model that's out there, but it'll grow in familiarity, and that will make a difference to investment plans, to peaking. Okay.
Yeah, great. Let's move on to the sort of topic of energy efficiency. I think that was the last slide of Mr. Vidal-Quadra's presentation, saying that we're on track for our renewables target, we're on track for our carbon reduction targets, but for energy efficiency, not on track. And Dave, you mentioned the sort of rebound effect. So if it's cheaper, then do more of it. I'd like to open up to the panel just the topic of energy efficiency. Is it a real trend or wishful thinking?
Yeah, it's right that we are behind these targets with respect to energy efficiency. However, I do not buy into this rebound effect. I mean, yes, it may happen, but the alternative to not drive this innovation is not the real alternative. I mean, as you all know, Germany reunified in 1989, and we had this business model in Eastern Germany where they avoided all these rebound effects because they did not drive the innovation at all. They did not leave the choices to the consumers, and that really then drove the efficiency altogether. I mean, in all aspects. It was not only an economic disaster, it was also an ecological disaster, right? And they also forced their consumers to do certain things. And probably we are all living in free economies, more or less free economies, and we want to keep the choices with the consumer. So, and as long as you have the choices with the consumer, there will always be the risk of rebound effects. And now the case is, how do you set the incentives? Yeah, and you mentioned already one business model where you have then a huge threshold at a certain level. Yeah, so obviously, if you do only marginal things in the flexibility of the tariffs, that's a common observation in a lot of examples I also have seen, especially in Northern America, but also in other areas, little happens. Yeah, because for a lot of people, the energy bill is at the moment not that relevant. Yeah, we have to admit that. I mean, who of know you? Each one can now ask their own question. Do you know your energy bill, your annual energy bill? Probably most of you do not know. Yeah. So that is in the moment it's not at the right attention. So obviously, you want to keep the freedom for the consumer, the freedom to take choices, but you want to give a stronger incentive to drive them in a certain direction. So probably there has to be a bigger difference between high tariffs and low tariffs to make the consumers really think, hey, maybe I can really shift some behavior or invest in some appliance equipment that I use the energy in a more efficient way. if you want to drive this behavior and still leaving the consumer the final choice. And I think then we will see, and in the moment this is an experience state. I mean, we are participating in a project in Germany sponsored by the Department of Energy, by the Federal Department of Energy and Innovation. And they are establishing in the rural area a marketplace currently, where the prosumers can trade energy. Yeah, just to learn and to have an experiment and see how the prosumers behave and what business model emerge from there. And we do not know the outcome, we cannot predict it. But I think it's a starting point to see what is necessary to really change the consumer's behavior without forcing them to do, but still let them choices. And then we have, and that we also have to see in a lot of countries, that it's a different aspect, because some of my colleagues here mentioned there are also some resistance already from certain people, from certain consumers against smart metering because of data protection. And we really have to keep close attention on that. Yeah? There are articles, also very much in Germany, that you can read the TV movies you have seen from your energy bill if you have a detailed look on it, because with the flat screen screens the energy consumption is higher if the screen is bright, and it's lower if it is dark. And the pattern then for each movie is like a barcode. Yeah? So, and people say, hey, I do not want my utility looking into my movie consumption. And certainly that is right. So we have to take these things seriously. And certainly we know it also from other industries, like the telecommunication industry, that you can encrypt the data and you can protect the data, you can anonymize the data, and so on and so on. But I think there has to be a more active dialogue now with the consumers in order to also address these concerns actively, and that probably is something, a shortcoming of all of us. Yeah, the equipment suppliers, maybe also utilities, maybe especially also the politicians, that this has not been sufficiently addressed to also take these risks out of the entire industry.
Well, yeah, energy efficiency. I think energy efficiency is a given. I mean, whether it's by choice or by legislation, energy efficiency is always, next generation of products are always more efficient. The problem we've got is energy efficiency doesn't really address the problem about energy supply. And I've been involved recently, there's a Channel 4 program on Sunday nights called The Future Home, or Home of the Future. It's changed its title about 6 times since I first got involved with it. But anyway, I was the technical advisor on there. It's funded by E.ON. And the most interesting thing that came out of that was that when we were given the house, and this is actually good for on the politician side as well, the house was chosen at random. But when they were doing this, our marketing team, the lovies in our marketing team, had this fantastic idea about home of the future, gadgets and all this. And then we got pulled in to say, we're not having that thing, that is absolutely ludicrous and we'll look stupid in front of Centrica and all the other things. So I had to take a lot of stuff out. But what was really interesting was, what was the key message going to be? Now, as it happened, this house was built in 1990 and was completely untouched. So actually, we suddenly went, wow, this is great. Here we have a 1990 house with all 1990 fixtures and fixings. Can we do the 2030 and can we do the 2050 government energy reduction targets? So we went and we modelled it and we thought, great, we can do it. And I have to, some people know, I'm not for solar PV, but I have to say, the only way we could get that house to meet the 2050 target was to put solar PV on it. That last 3 or 4% of carbon reduction could only be achieved by solar PV, so I had to admit defeat there. So we did that, and we insulated the house, changed up everything in there, the lighting, the whole lot. Now, what was interesting was we'd calculated we were going to reduce the family's energy bill by about 75%. because we put energy generating activities systems in there, there's a fuel cell, micro CHP and PV and everything. We said there'd be about £2,000 a year in the pockets over and above their energy prices. So they were really happy until they got the first bill. And their bills have gone up dramatically.
Yeah.
In fact, embarrassingly so. And the reason for that is if we then installed all of the appliances that that house had with latest appliances and didn't add anything else and just put the same number of bulbs in with LED lights that they've currently got, we would have met that target. But no. This house of the future showed us just how much always-on technology costs you. And the biggest consumer, and if you watch the programme you'll see it, there is a 2-metre rack in the garage controlling all of the devices in the house because they're all connected to the internet. And that was consuming 1.5 kilowatts, just keeping the fans and the lights and always-on connection. And that's before we then put all the electric vehicles in and everything. And that to us was a real warning flag. Doesn't matter what you do on energy efficiency, you've actually got to start addressing energy reduction because that is the issue. The issue is that energy consumption is always going to increase no matter what your efficiency measures. You've got to start looking at how do you reduce it, and I think that is the biggest challenge we probably face.